Okay, in this tutorial I'm going to break this drawing down into steps that are way easier to follow than you might imagine, so that you can have a go, create this, and amaze yourself. Okay, so as I explained in the intro, I'm going to break this down into steps so that you learn about the painting process and techniques, as well as the app that I'm using, Procreate. But that isn't to say that you couldn't use a different app on a different tablet and still follow along. Having said that, within the app Procreate, I'm using their default A4 canvas, which is 297 by 210 millimeters at 300 dpi. And then also within Procreate and the color profiles, I'm using their sRGB code, the one that ends in 2.1. I'm also using their default brushes, so I'm going to be using within airbrushing, I'm going to be using the soft, the medium brush, and the medium hard brush, the top three within airbrushing. Within organic, I'm going to use the rainforest brush. And also within elements, I might also use the clouds brush. And in terms of the colors, well, I've already pre-selected a color palette here. Each of these colors, if you go to it and then go to value, you'll see it has a hexadecimal code associated with each color. Each of these codes is listed down in the video description, so you just need to copy and paste them into this box one at a time. Press enter, the color will appear up here, and then you can tap it together yourself. Or next to the codes in the description is a link that takes you to my Patreon page, where you can download the color file for free to save you some time. And Patreon is also the place where you can support this channel and gain access to exclusive content such as extended versions of many of these tutorials. I'd like to say a massive thank you to those people who do support me over at Patreon. It really does make an enormous difference, so thank you so much. And with all of that said and done, we're going to get started. So we're going to go to our layers, layer 1. I'm going to go to my first colour on the top row, and I'm going to drag from the colour circle into the canvas and release, and that flood fills the whole canvas. I'm going to go to my layers and create a new layer, layer 2, and I'm going to go to the elements clouds brush. I'm going to go to the second colour on the top row, and on this layer I'm going to put the clouds brush to maybe 10% size and 100% opacity, and I'm just going to start circling in the top left corner some of these shapes here. Now much of this is going to be covered and obscured by other things, so we're just going to get this area with some of this texture. We'll start off with the bigger shapes, and we only want elements of the blue sky to kind of remain just in the odd place. And then I'm going to turn the brush size down to 5%, zoom in, do some slightly more controlled circles with this brush just to add a few more little round shapes. And everything is being applied with a round motion for this element. I'm just going to close it up in that corner, maybe turn it back up again, 10, 12, doesn't really matter. Just going to shut down this lower area. Then I'm going to create a new layer, layer 3, and on this layer I'm going to tap on it and put on the clipping mask, which means that anything I add now with the third colour on the top row is going to be restricted and contained within the boundaries of the shape of the layer underneath. So I'm going to continue with the elements brush. I'm going to put it down to the 5% size, but lower now, about 40% strength. And from the very edge to begin with, again, I'm just going to circle in this brush, pressing lightly as it comes further down from that edge. And then as it gets closer to the edge again, I'm just going to circle and press on more. The sun is going to be pretty high in the scene, probably slightly over from this side. So it's going to catch the edges of that cloud, probably on the right side of it a little bit more, but you don't really need to spend a huge amount of time on this element anyway. Like I say, as it comes further down, you can just circle it in, but lightly. It's not going to appear as strong as that then. Maybe we could even put it up to 8% and press lightly just to build in just a hint of that lighter colour drifting down into the cloud, just blending it through. It's not a particularly difficult thing to do. Then turn it down to back towards the 5% again. Zoom in just a little bit. Maybe create some more round shapes, but further backwards from the edge of the cloud, more into not quite the middle of it, but yeah, a little bit further back. Something like this. Then I'm going to stay on the same layer, but go to the fourth colour on the top row. And perhaps I need to turn the brush size down just a little bit. So 3%, still at the 40% strength. It's 41, but as long as it's kind of within the region. Do bear in mind that if you're a percentage out, because the sliders are a bit awkward, it doesn't really matter because I'm pressing it at different strengths anyway. And so obviously that changes the strength of the opacity too. So again, we just want to really focus a little bit of time on that edge, show where the sun is going to catch it the most. Try to keep it in more circular motions. It's going to preference that right side once more. And then we're going to have some trees that obscure it over at that side. So really it's only this small area that's going to be that visible anyway. Bring it over here, a little bit further down into the cloud as I was saying. So it's not all just about that top edge. There could be some sections that just catch the light a little bit more, kind of indented into the cloud formation. But I don't really feel like I need to do too much of that. I'm going to put it up, 8% size, maybe turn it down, 20% opacity. And then if we just go over some of these areas, it will just help soften and blend it in a little bit more. And again, we can bring that further down into the lower areas, just a hint of it here and there. Now it's all got the clipping mask on, so we can go to something like the adjustments, the Gaussian blur, blur it in, maybe 5%. It's not going to blur the edges, but it's going to blur everything in the sort of center area of the cloud. Deselect. And that's just softened it in a little bit more. Layer, and probably merge it down to the layer underneath. Now it's all on one layer. And well, some of those edges are a little bit crisp. So I'm again going to go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur, and just blur that in maybe 3%, and it just softens it a hint more and just gives it a nicer feel, I feel. We're going to go to our layers and create a new layer, layer 3. I'm going to go to the organic rainforest brush, and I'm going to go to a different color. We're going to go to the 6th color on the top row. We're going to put the brush size maybe at 4% and 100% opacity. And we're just going to build in, coming in from that side and just creeping up this edge and then up to the very top of our canvas. And I'm actually going to bring it further that way too. We're going to obscure big sections of cloud. Just circle it in. A very similar kind of process to the clouds that we've already done. And again, it always isn't a good idea to get too precious about anything you've already added, because when you go in and add a new element over the top, it's going to be partially destructive as well. I'm going to whack that up to over 10% size. Not too big though, otherwise you will find it difficult to stay within the boundaries. Okay, so we've just kind of blotted in that whole area. Back down to the 4%, and again just further fine tune. Maybe just bring it up there a little bit. And what we can do, I suppose, with the clouds, if we feel like we've cut out too much and we want to reclaim some of the blue areas, we can go to the layer 2, to the transform, put it on freeform, and then we can just pinch it that way a little bit, and it allows us to reclaim more of the details that we've added and created. And perhaps that works better for me. Back to the top layer. I'm going to tap on it and put on the alpha lock, which means that now when I go to something like the 7th color and add that color, again, it's going to be restricted to the boundaries of the layer we've already created. Before I do that though, I might just slide and duplicate it. And if I had 2 fingers back, so you can see the difference, it's got some bits along the edge that are a bit almost translucent, they're not full opacity. Whereas when we create that second layer, it just makes it a little bit crispier, a bit firmer, and I think I prefer that. So I'm going to take those 2 versions now and just pinch them together to merge them. It hasn't turned the alpha lock off, it's still on, which is perfect. And we are going to go in now with that 7th color, still with the rainforest brush. We're going to put that down to maybe 2% size, and just a hint back, so 80% strength. And then I'm just going to go and start tapping in this lighter color. Now, I suppose we've got a bright sunlight coming in, and when the sun hits the trees, then you see the nice green colour. Shadow areas where the sun isn't quite reaching, we've got this slightly bluer colour remaining. And we can bring it down a little bit further down here, although we're going to do more things to obscure it. So really it's just kind of this area that we need to focus on. And as it gets towards the top, it's going to have more of that green, so we can have some areas where it really condenses together. A real block of that colour. Then as it comes kind of down into our scene, it's going to get more fragmented, more broken, sparse. And I think that that's quite a nice look as well. Always just zoom out every now and again just to make sure you're just keeping a sense of the overall perspective of the canvas. Just go along the edge and just block it in a bit more here and there. I think what I'd like to do is tap on the brush, go into the settings. On the stroke path, I'm going to change the spacing from 27 up to 45%, or as close as that as you can get it. It's a bit fiddly. Click done. Keep it at 2% size and the 80% opacity, and it will just separate this texture out a little bit. In fact, let's go for a bigger size. Let's be a bit bolder, so 4%. And it makes a little less work, so you can just tap it in a few times. You get some big shapes and some small shapes in there mixed together. Bring it down a little bit, but not too far. I kind of want to keep the effect of the sunlight higher up in those upper areas. And as it comes down, it's just fizzling out. Just a few taps of it should work quite nicely. On that layer, I think I'm just going to go to the transform. In my example, I'm going to go to freeform and just pinch it up a little bit from the bottom. Bit fiddly to do. So on freeform, I'm going to pinch it up. It's going to condense it together a little bit so it doesn't quite come as far down as it did. I think that is working better. I'm not too worried about the bottom half. If it really kind of puts you off and you want to just go in and blot it in, then you can. You can go back to the 6th colour on the top row, tap on this layer and turn off the alpha lock, and then something, I don't know, like the airbrushing soft brush will do. 5% size, 100% opacity, and you can just colour this in, or just drag it from the circle into the area that remains and it flood fills. I'm going to create a new layer, layer 4, tap on it and put on the clipping mask, which creates a little arrow and it links it to the layer underneath. I'm going to go along my colours to the 8th colour. I'm going to go back in with the organic rainforest brush. Same settings at the 45% spacing. We're not going to change it now. 5% size, maybe 60% strength, and about a third of the way up, I'm just going to do a line of this across and then just kind of bring it left and right. We don't want it to go up into the higher parts of that texture. We'll just create a band that cuts across, and it's going to be more condensed as it's kind of lower down. So go over it a few more times, around a third of the way up or down, depending on how you look at it. And then we'll allow it to just get a bit more fragmented as it goes up. I'm not too bothered about it up there. But yeah, more of it down here. It doesn't matter if it goes beyond that point either. That's absolutely fine too. Then I'm going to go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and slide that across to about the 20% and deselect. And it's got rid of the texture. That's not really an issue. We didn't particularly care about the texture. It's just creating the gradient of the darker tone near the lower part of that 2/3 area. I'm going to move along a colour to the 9th colour. Stay with the rainforest brush. 3% size, 60% opacity. And then just at the lower part of that dark band, I'm just going to introduce this colour a little bit. You can imagine some low-lying kind of bushes and other things that just leave this colour. And again, we can just drag down into that lower area, slide it to the right, and then it almost fills it in, and then just go and do that more manually. And you can see we've got that nice texture now, which is a lighter colour from the dark colour there. I'm going to stay on layer 4. I'm going to go to the airbrushing soft brush, turn it down to 2% size and 40% strength, and then just in this area especially, I'm going to do some lines that jut up, and these can represent tree trunks that are just being a little bit visible in this area. Don't need to spend too long doing that, just a few, just a subtle suggestion of them there. Then we're going to go backwards to the 7th color, and I'm going to go back to the organic rainforest brush, and I'm going to turn the brush size really quite low at 1%, maybe 60% opacity, and just to kind of line up with these tree trunks, I'm going to start adding in suggestion of kind of pine trees, or fir trees certainly. And again, the sunlight is just catching the top section of these trees, so it's coming down just into this area, and it's just going to catch them a little bit. We're just doing the top points of the trees. Again, the light's going to preference the right side of things. Just get those points in there. You don't need to do too many of them. Going to have other things obscuring them again. And then turn it up maybe to 2% size, higher on the 2% anyway, and 30% strength. We can just tap just subtle suggestions. There is still texture lower down, but you don't need to go into any great detail with it. Like that. I'm going to go back to my layers and create a new layer, layer 5. Back to my colors. I'm going to go for the first color on the middle row. I'm going to go in with the rainforest brush once more. 2% size and 90% strength. And we want some trees that are just high in this area. We want the peaks. And we can just rock this texture left to right a little bit. Maybe we could turn it down even more to the 1%, just to get a nice sharp peak at the top of the tree. And then just kind of zigzag it left to right. We want to create the overall silhouette of the tree to begin with. And once you've got one, then we can start another one. So it's important to leave some gaps. I'm not really going in there with tree trunks. I mean, if you wanted to, if you prefer to do that, you could always set positioning of your trees just so you know where you're working. You can do that from the outset if it helps, but I'm not too bothered about that. I might just put the opacity up to 100. It's not really changing very much to have it at 90 or 100. Sometimes I just prefer to just keep it a little bit back from the very edge of 100 and just do things a bit more gradually, create some variation. But actually, I think even at the 100, because of the nature of the brush, it's absolutely fine. And then they can start to collide together. And then you can start another one and just maybe vary up the kind of personality of the trees. Maybe some of them can be a little bit wider. Some of them can be taller and thinner. Some of them can just have a bit more width to them. And what will tend to happen is you come back from that top edge, you get down to a certain point, and they all just kind of mush together anyway, which is perfect. Just whiz through these, speed it up a little bit. Shouldn't take massively long. Remember the gaps. Think about the overall shape. And really we're just creating that top edge. The rest of it is not that important. In fact, we could even just turn the brush up to 4% once we've gone past a certain way. And just go in there and really kind of block it in. And again, we want to bring it down this tone, probably down to about the 2/3 of the way down, pretty much on a level with what we've done here. Maybe a little bit below that, because it is going to come as a landmass a little bit further closer to us. So maybe what we should do actually is we go to the airbrushing soft brush, 3% size, 100% opacity. Bring it across. And I don't want to take it all the way to the edge. I want to just have it as a section here that comes a little bit further forward than that kind of horizon line at the back. Don't worry about that bottom edge. We can tidy that up. We're just getting the general position of it in first. Once we're happy with that, again, we can go in and just block in, put it up to maybe 5%, why not just get the bulk of it blocked in? And that's got us so far. Once we've got that kind of general shape, we don't want to add too much in here. There's going to be the land and then the tree trunks, and then it kind of pads out a little bit here. Then I'm going to return to the organic rainforest brush, the same settings it was. Actually, no, I want to go down, don't we? So 2% size, maybe even at the very bottom of 2%. And again, we're just going to focus on the top edge of our trees in this section. And then when we get to the edge here, we can create the top height of it. And then as it comes down here, you're going to have a sense of clusters, like branches, collections of leaves or whatever on the edge here. I like to be a bit more broken along that edge. And this is just the kind of more subdued tone, the shadow part of it, the silhouette of it. And we're going to go in with highlights, just like we did in the background. Go to that layer. We'll create a new layer, but we'll tap on the new layer and put on the clipping mask so it has the same kind of effect. So we can add a new color, the second color. Then we're still going to in with the rainforest brush, but I've just reset it. So the spacing is going to be less again. Second color on the middle row, 1% size, maybe 90% strength. And then we're just going to start doing this in a slightly more controlled way. Again, we're just adding more of this highlight onto the right side of the tree to begin with. But we are going to bring it also down into the kind of blocked in area as well, at least so far down. So just like we did with this, we stopped after a certain point and allowed the shadow to kind of dominate a little bit. So again, in this area, we can just allow it to come so far down and then just allow it to peter out. So I'm just tapping it in. A few bits in the lower area, but not as much. Concentrate on the right side of the tree. A little bit time consuming, but again, that's fine. Zoom out, just check the progress, see how it's overall looking. The big bulky areas where there's lots of that illuminated green. We also have the third green, and well, we can go in there and just add hints of that too. But again, just allow it to be a little bit broken and fragmented. Predominantly, we want the second green. We're going to have much of this obscured by other things too, but we're going to bring it down into this area a little bit here and there anyway. Just taps, broken texture. Again, don't forget to do more on the right side of our trees. Right, so I'll just put the texture up 2%, higher up. Tap this in. And you can see at this edge, it's going to get a more broken kind of aesthetic. Just space it around just as taps. Maybe on the edge, it's just going to catch the light more, so you can go over it a little bit. Perhaps I'll turn the opacity down, actually, maybe 50%. A bit more subtle then. Okay, I'm going to go to the fourth colour on the middle row. Still with the rainforest brush. I will go back to it and just space it further apart, 45% again. Deselect, 2% size, 50% strength. And then I'm just going to start bringing in some of this texture in this lower section, so it's not completely flat. And again, just sort of circle, scribble it in. We don't want these areas to look completely lifeless, so just get some of this texture in there. Doesn't have to be neat. I'm going to go to the airbrushing soft brush, put it down to lowest part of 2% size, 100% opacity, and then some of these tree trunks can just start to be more visible in places. Think about where the peaks are, maybe try and line them up in places so you can see through. Think about branches, add a suggestion of those. Again, think about where the peaks of the tree are and just roughly kind of line them up here and there. I don't want to make it too obvious. And also we want it to be kind of broken so the foliage breaks that up anyway. With just a few taps to bring it down, not a solid line perhaps. Apart from maybe it's just some areas where there's less foliage on a certain part of the tree. Maybe lower down. We can see the bottom part of our tree trunks. Like that. I'm going to go to my layers and create a new layer, layer 7. Go to my colors. I'm going to use the 5th color and the organic rainforest brush. I'm going to have it at the 45% spacing, bottom part at 2% size and 50% opacity. And then just at the bottom part of these trees, I want to bring in some sense that the sun is maybe starting to spill through some of the gaps and just highlight the top edge and bits of the ground. Perhaps I'll put it down even further on the 1%. Zoom in and just go over some of these. You don't want to make it so that every part looks illuminated when it's sort of hidden amongst the trees. It's going to be more of a kind of dappled light kind of look. There's going to be other areas where we have a more of a concentration of these highlights, but for these areas maybe just a few taps. Just sort of work it in and around those lower areas. Zoom over to this part and I'm going to put perhaps the size up to higher on the 1% and maybe 70% strength. And there's just going to be some bits that catch the light a little bit more now. Doesn't have to be terribly consistent. There'll just be a section there, for example. Again, it can be quite broken. Maybe in this middle section here, we can bring some more highlights in. We kind of had a sense of it here anyway. Just some more in there. Again, we can creep some of that up. Extent of the tree in places if we feel we need to. Perhaps we could go back to layer 6, tap on it, put on the alpha lock as well, and go in with the rainforest brush with this color. And then anywhere where we've added, we could put it up there and enhance it and make it a little bit more vibrant too. I kind of don't want to do too much of that. Quite like to have a feeling that there's different areas have different kinds of greens. So we'll go back to layer 7, continue what we were doing. Have some of these. I mean, maybe what we should do is put it behind layer 6. And that way, when we have a tree trunk, then some of these highlights can sit quite nicely behind some of those too, which is quite a nice effect. There's a bit over here that's sticking out, on my version anyway. So I'm just going to add that sun's coming in here and really just picking up on the edges of that. Quite like that idea. It's just really illuminating it there. Okay, from the top layer, I'm going to create a new layer, layer 8. I'm going to tap on it and put on the clipping mask again, so a little arrow appears. And it still is linking it down to layer 5. You can see all of these layers are linked to layer 5. I'm going to go in with the soft brush with an airbrushing, 5% size, maybe 40% strength, and I'm just going to bring a more vibrant green in this lower area. Not too much. Want it to just be focused in this lower part. Maybe turn it down to 2% and you can just control it so it kind of merges up into this area too a little bit. And then just other kind of bits that just rise up here as well. That kind of works. I think at this point we should probably deal with the bottom edge of that particular bit of land. So we'll go back to layer 5. We'll go in with the eraser, set the eraser at the airbrushing medium brush, say 3% size, 100% opacity. And what we're going to do is I'm just going to go to this edge, just nibble away at there, and then I'm going to hold the Apple Pencil down and bring it to the side and hold it. It just creates a nice line, and then we can just tidy it up like that. I can then go back to the top layer, layer 8, back in with the organic rainforest brush, and we're going to use the 7th colour on the middle row, 1% size, 70% opacity, and I'm just going to have some of this highlight really impacting on the kind of lower parts of this mass here. And again, I'm just creating these kinds of shapes. Imagine kind of mounds and lumps on the ground, where the top edge is obviously catching the light. And have it as a bank of grass that kind of rises up here, runs a little bit parallel with that one that's further back. Creates a nice slope, and then don't forget to leave some gaps in this colour. The more gaps you leave, then it creates the sense that there's a kind of mound, and therefore it's creating a shadow side as well. And we can move that across all the way to the other side, so it gets slightly more exaggerated, a bigger kind of lumps and bumps in the lower part here. Perhaps it's just slightly closer to us. And then it's just kind of joined together over in this region. A bit more broken when it gets down towards the water edge there. That's fine. A bit more merging together, and perhaps in this slope. And then at the top edge of that, perhaps we could retreat back to the 5th colour, even lower on that 1%, still 70% strength. And then we could just add some shapes in here. So it kind of brings those two areas together a little bit more. I'm going to, from the top layer, create a new layer, layer 9. And I'm going to go in with the medium brush within airbrushing. I'm going to go to the 1st colour on the bottom row. I'm going to have it at top end of 2% size and 90% opacity. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit, and then maybe I'm just going to introduce a tree trunk. In fact, the percentage is a bit too high on the size. Let's put it further down. Let's go to the bottom end of 2. That way, where we can control it. So we can always go over it a few times at the bottom part of that tree trunk just to broaden it out, make it thicker, and then we're going to have it encroaching further up into our scene. I don't want it to go all the way to the top. Something like that I think works. And then we could have another couple of trees. Now I'm not bringing it all the way down to the base of that shape. I haven't kind of planted and buried amongst the bushes. Another one in there. Again, slightly thicker at the base. Tree trunk. Don't want to go too much with that though. A few more of these just in there. Press lightly if you want them to be sort of fading out. A bit softer. Maybe just a couple more in this region. Then with the rainforest brush, 2% size, 100% opacity, I'm just going to go into the top area and start to build in the kind of character and shape of this tree once more. Again, leave some gaps between the sections. Put it to 100%, yeah. Perhaps I'll turn it down a little bit, so slightly lower on the 2%. So we can just have some little anomalies, some little bits that stick out as like tufts. But we definitely want to leave some gaps in there too. Once we get over to here, obviously the trees, the tree trunks, the foliage is kind of all going to mush together and merge together a little bit. And I'm okay with that happening. Over at this corner, it can all just sort of scribble it in, allow it to kind of merge together with the other colours that we've already got. I'm just going to go in there and just concentrate some of this a little bit more, close down some of the gaps where the trees are all mushing together. We're not likely to see as much light coming through when it's all mushed and merged, but we have created a block of dark colour now, so we probably need to go in with a lighter colour again. So the second colour on the middle row, with the airbrushing down to low on the 1%, 100% opacity, and we can go in there and just create some blobs that kind of congregate and merge together on, again, the right side of our tree. But then they can start to kind of spread across the other trees that are all growing in with it as well. It's not to say we won't have any highlights that come to the left side, because we will. The sun is pretty high up, so it will also catch a little bit on that side. This tree is more important than some of the other ones because obviously it's darker, it's more prominent. So just spend a little bit more time on the shapes on this one until you're satisfied with it. Preserve some of the shadow. You don't want to add so much texture that you lose kind of dark silhouetted colour, and then allow it to just sort of peter out. It comes down here, and then that's a nice kind of merging of those different areas. The tree trunks, perhaps we could have a lighter colour. We can go to the bottom row and the 7th colour. Perhaps go on the layer and tap on it and put on the alpha lock. And then we'll go in with the airbrushing medium brush, that's fine. 1% size, 30% strength, and just zoom in. Maybe just allow it to kind of touch it in places along the edge. The sunlight is just going to get through, highlight the tree trunks. Just a little bit here and there. And that again just helps bring them a little bit further forward. I'm going to tap on it and turn off the alpha lock now. And that will allow me to turn it down even further and just go over that. And the opacity of the layer doesn't matter now. When you have an alpha lock on and something's been a low opacity on that layer and you try and add to it, then the previous opacity actually does count, but it doesn't if you turn off the alpha lock. So we can really perhaps put it at a higher percentage, 60%, add some more highlights of tree trunks in there. Even if we can't see the rest of the tree trunk, we can just add the highlights. Like that. Okay, so we're going to go to this side, create a new layer for it, layer 10. And well, on this side we use the first colour on the bottom row, so we may as well do the same again. Go in with the organic rainforest brush once more, 2% size, 100% opacity, and we're just going to build in a tree that's more prominent, closer to us in this section. So we want the top edge to be quite solid, and then I don't mind if it kind of disintegrates and falls apart lower down. Another kind of spike of a tree here. Circle it in, bring it down, let it kind of disappear in that texture a little bit. So I'll bring some of that cool dark blue colour down into this lower part of the bank as well. We'll go in there and refine it further later, but for now, just suggesting it in. Got a dark area here, it makes sense to add the dark there. And again, we're going to go in this time with the second colour again on the middle row. Rainforest brush, 1% size, 100% opacity. And I'm not using the alpha lock or anything else this time. I'm just going to just go for it. I'll also turn the opacity down actually. Let's make it more subdued, 50%. Trusting that without the alpha lock now I can kind of get a sense of the texture. You've done it a few times, then you don't need to restrict it to stick within the shapes. Once you've kind of done it a few times, you'll get the idea. Then we're going to go for something more vibrant. Let's try the 8th colour on the middle row. Same settings, except we're going to put it up to 80% strength, and then I can just tap in highlights on a bush that's just closer to us, catching the light nicely. Maybe along the edge of these trees here, just like we've got on the ground, we can have some nice vibrant greens coming in. We go backwards, maybe the fifth colour, not quite as yellow, and I'm pressing lightly now, just kind of feathering that in. We can always come back to these textures and just spend a bit longer on them if we need to, but just to get them in there initially, and we'll spend a bit more time on that a little later. Okay, just looking at this area, I think I want to make it a little bit more subdued in the background area there. So I'm going to go back to layer 4. I'm going to go to the adjustments, the hue, saturation and brightness, and I'm just going to turn the brightness down from 50 to 48% and deselect. And then I'm also going to go to layer 6. I had some of the tree trunks and other details. Again, the adjustments, hue, saturation and brightness, and just change it from 50 to 49. Deselect. Go to layer 9. Adjustments, hue, saturation and brightness, and again, just put it to 49%. And I think that the balance sits a little bit better there. I'm then going to focus on this area here, and we're going to draw a cabin within this area of the picture. So a nice sort of lakeside wooden structure. So I'm going to go to my top layer and create a new layer, layer 11. I'm going to use the medium brush within airbrushing. I'm going to go for the 6th color on the bottom row. I'm going to put the brush size at top end of 1% and 100% opacity. And I'm just going to decide where to put the top of our cabin. Now we can move it around even once we've started this, but I'm figuring I don't want it too near the top, maybe just a little bit upwards of halfway and towards the edge over here. I'm going to do a little point. Then I need to decide the slope that comes down here. Take it towards the trees, hold it until it snaps to a straight line. Then the simplest way I can think of doing this is just to duplicate that. Go to the transform and flip it horizontally, and then just move this across, join it up at the top, deselect. You can then go to those two layers and just pinch them together, or tap on the top one and merge down. Now they're on one layer. Slide and duplicate it again, transform. We're going to move this across. Now I want this version to be slightly lower down, and because it's going to represent the back part of the cabin, I want it to be subject to slight rules of perspective, but not too much. I'm going to grab it on on uniform from the corner and just a little bit reduce it in size, and I'm going to pull it over here as well. Now I want the roof to be sloped down a little bit, but not too drastically. So I want that point to be higher than that one, but it doesn't need to be silly. If you go too much, it's going to look too exaggerated. It just needs to be kind of subtle. A slight gradient downwards. Deselect. We can merge them both together. Then obviously we need to join up some lines, so still with the same brush. From there to the other top point, doesn't matter if the line goes wonky, hold it until it snaps to a straight line, and then you can correct it. From there to, from there to there, hold it until it snaps. Now this one, it's going to look a bit strange if it's too pointed down. Now, generally speaking, if you're doing a technical drawing, you might keep them parallel, but we're also introducing the kind of perspective, so they will kind of pinch together a little bit as they come this way. I'll try that again. So it certainly wants to be higher at this point than it does over here, but just slightly less sloped. So pinch it up a little bit, just a notch more. That's a little less obvious than that. So that's a slightly steeper angle than that. It almost starts to level out as it comes down here. Not completely, it still is a little bit pitched. It's not completely horizontal, it's a little bit, but not as much as it is up here. Put the eraser to maybe the medium hard brush within airbrushing. 1% size, 100% opacity, and just carefully and neatly as you can, remove the unwanted areas and lines. And that includes any little untidy kind of overlap. Just use it to tidy up a little bit. Back to the brush. And we want to come downwards from this point. So a little bit inset from the corner, down until it reaches the bushes and hold it. And well, it's going to be something similar here, but you're not going to really see it. Then really we want to have it into interacting and interplaying with the edge of the greenery. So I'm just going to trace around close to that line initially. Doesn't matter if it overlaps it, you just kind of want to roughly trace around that area. Make sure you've closed it at all areas, and we can drag to flood fill that shape. Let go. And I'm going to go for a slightly different color at the top, so I'll go for maybe the 8th color on the bottom row and just drag to flood fill there. Now this is a particularly kind of clumsy transition from the wood cabin to the bushes, so we'll go to the eraser, set the eraser on organic rainforest brush. Again, same settings we've previously had it. 1% size, maybe 40% strength, and then just around this area you want to reclaim some of these organic shapes, that edge, some of the highlights that are interacting with that cabin. We want to lose that sharp line essentially. So just go over it until we feel a bit more comfortable with, and it doesn't matter if some of the cool colors come in here as well, that's fine. But we definitely want to get rid of that kind of brutal line that we just created. Like that. And that's working a bit better. I'm going to go to that layer, go to the little N and just dial it back a touch, maybe to about the 80%. And it's just going to have it settle a little bit back there, not be too dark, and I think that works better. I'm going to go to layers and create a new layer, layer 12. I'm going to tap on it and put on the clipping mask, and again this links it to the layer with the wood cabin. I'm then going to go in again with the airbrushing medium brush. I'm going to switch colors. I'm going to go for the 7th color on the bottom row. I'm going to have it at 1% size, 100% opacity, and I need to start bringing in the top section of our roof. Now I'm no kind of roofing expert, so I'm not sure whether to call these tiles or wood kind of panels, I'm not sure. But it's all made out of wood. We don't have any clay tiles or stone tiles, so it's all made out of wood. So whatever you'd call it on the roofing, I'm not too sure. Maintaining the angle as we cut across. Allow some gaps to kind of merge. It's a little bit tricky just to keep the consistency and have it lined up there at the bottom as well. Something like this. I'm also going to go in with the 10th color, put that down to maybe 40%. And I'm going to have that mixing in with there a little bit just to warm it up slightly. Don't need it completely consistent. It's okay to have kind of different kind of mixtures here and there. I'm then going to go to the 8th color on the bottom row, still with the medium brush with an airbrushing, the lowest part 2%, and I'll stay at the 40% strength, opacity, and then I'm going to have a section here, and I'm just doing it so it runs parallel with this edge, and then I'll do another one here. I can go over that a couple of times if I want to just really strengthen that up. Then I'm going to turn it down to kind of middle of the 1%, and then we're just going to have a band of this cut across here just to delineate a kind of difference of area between roof and the other panels. I might just go back to the 7th color, 40% strength still, 1%. Maybe we could just tighten these up a little bit so the gaps aren't quite so extreme. We don't have quite as much of that scribbled kind of edge. Narrow the gaps between them a little bit. I think that works better. I'm just going to merge those two together now. I'm happy with that. So that's all in one layer. I'm going to create a new layer. Again, it's layer 12, but we're not going to link it to the layer underneath. That way we can go to the 6th color on the bottom row, still with the same brush, and it will appear darker over the top of that color. So I'm going to have it at the 1% and maybe 20% strength, And then just underneath that line, I'm going to create or bring in some shadow. Let me just divide it upwards there a little bit. And then underneath that line as well. I'm just going to bump it up to well into the 2% and just bring a bit more of that shadow in. So allow it to kind of fade out a bit of a gradient. So bringing the effect of like a shadowy part in the upper areas a little bit more. And also just a little bit on that side too. Back down again to the 1%. Stay at the 20% strength. I'm just going to start dividing this up a little bit into different sections. Now, it doesn't have to be exactly as I'm showing you here, but I'm going to bring a line roughly down in the central area. And then I'm going to do a line kind of almost horizontally across there, pretty much. Sketch it in. I'm going to box in almost like a window section here, and then just scribble that in. Shade it in, maybe just do it diagonally. Shade it in so it's just a note darker. And then upwards, sort of close to that edge, just the line that goes up here and here. We'll concentrate on this side first. Then I'm going to go maybe to the 10th colour. Turn that strength down to maybe 10%. And we're just going to bolster that a little bit. I don't want to make that too strong. Even at 10%, that's quite light. So maybe we'll turn it down even more, 5%. And just to the side of our dark line, we're going to strengthen it with a slightly lighter colour. And we don't want to take that all the way to the top. Again, it's going to be more in shadow up there. Perhaps we could just take a line above the dark line and above it here too. Again, we're just bringing out the suggestion of kind of structural elements. And maybe on this side we could just create a sense of almost like shutters or boards or something. You don't overly need to spell this out. Continue that line across, maybe a line down there. Maybe we could just create some slats there. Maybe another one subtly suggested up here. And again, we could switch to the dark colour, the 6th colour. Bring a shadow across. Back to the last colour, 10th colour. Maybe another line that cuts. Again, hugs close to that shape. Another one. And I'm going to switch to the 9th colour on the bottom row. And then maybe a little bit up from that percentage, maybe 15%. And then just build in some of this kind of blue tone a little bit and leave some gaps. We get some texture coming in here as well. And then don't take it all the way to the top because we'll keep that bit in shadow. Maybe within this kind of window area, we go back to the 10th colour and then we just press lightly, divide that up a little bit. And you have fun, you can divide this however you want. There's no absolute rules for this. I'm going to go back to the 6th colour. Maybe just go in and exaggerate some of the shadows here a little bit. Make a bit more of a feature of them. And then maybe we'll have a bit of an overhang there as well, so create more of a shadow. Something like this. And then we're going to move to this side and slightly lighter on the colours. We'll still use the 10th colour. And we're only kind of being quite rough and suggestive of shapes and forms. So I'm just going to stick with the 1%, 15% strength. And maybe just bring them out a little bit more on this side. Again, you don't need to overly articulate what these different things are, just some boxes and lines. Some slats that maybe then you get some opposite lines, so maybe just turn that up a little bit, 20%, lower on the 1%. Some divisions like that. And again, it's suggestive of structural elements without getting too bogged down in precisely describing exactly what those things are. We can kind of use our imagination a little bit. Maybe back to the 7th colour. The lines here, a line in the middle. Allow it to fade off as it goes into the shadow. Maybe back to the 10th colour. 20% is a bit strong. Maybe 15. And we can just create an area here, for example. Turn it up, higher on the 1%. Box that in. Lower on the 1%. Something like this. And then we'll go to the 6th colour and we can start building in some darker areas. Maybe this is a window. I don't honestly know. There you go. Just playing around with shapes. I didn't want to do an obvious window and obvious shapes. I just wanted to keep it a little bit more ambiguous. Maybe we've got a suggestion of a door here. Another window over there, perhaps. Something like that. Maybe on the lower part, we can go back in with the 10th colour. Maybe the sun is going to just be a bit more impactful in that lower section compared to the upper part. Impacting a little bit more, you can see the sunlight just creeping in. Turn up a little bit, just lightly go over that, not too much. It almost gives the effect that the sun's just creeping in there a little bit more. We're going to add a little bit of a chimney stack, so stick with the 10th colour, 1% size, maybe 40% strength, and we'll just zoom up here, create a little structure. It's going to catch the light quite strongly. Then we'll go to the 8th colour, create a shadow side, really turn it down, and we obviously want an angle there to match the slope of the roof. You can kind of flatten out near the top. I don't need to worry too much about that. A little bit of darkness there, and then in with the 6th colour, turn it down maybe to 20%. We're going to match the pitch of the roof for this side, and then slightly downwards. It's only going to be a subtle difference, so pitch down slightly that way on this side. Back to the 8th colour, and this is a small element on a small detail in the image, so don't worry too much. 50% strength for the shadow. Just extend the shadow across here. Maybe go to the 3rd colour on the top row. Low on the 1% size and just create a little bit of a change of colour here, just where it joins, and then just a hint of a different material up at the top as well. And it's a subtle little detail amongst a much bigger picture, so don't worry overly about it. I am going to go back to the 6th colour, however, with still the medium brush, 1% size, maybe 30% strength, and I can just go in now and just articulate things if I feel it needs it. Maybe just create a couple of lines that do cut across. As well as some lines that just jut down or upwards as you see fit. Slightly define that top edge a little bit. Okay, it's a pretty rough image of a cabin, but I think it does the job well enough. We're going to go to my layers and create a new layer, layer 13. I feel like we need some even lighter colors there, so we're going to go along to the 8th color on the middle row, and we're going to go with the organic rainforest brush. We've still got the spacing at 45%, the lowest part at 2% size and about 80% strength. And then we're just going to go into some of these areas now and bring a really nice vibrant yellowy green into various different areas. Now I want to illuminate this slope of grass a little bit more. Perhaps I'll turn it down 1%. Let's go over this a little bit more. I really want that to pop and contrast really brightly. Let's go around the top edges of some of these forms with this brightest of colours, even down as we come to the water's edge. Zoom out, just check the impact. Quite happy with that. Extend that across. Again, all the way down to the water's edge in places. Circle it in. Again, we can add this to these areas just so that we kind of obscure sections of the cabin as well. It's kind of buried in there, really. I think that works quite nicely. Perhaps we should preserve a little bit more shadow over at this side than, you know, in this region, for example. So we could maybe go back to maybe this colour, the 6th colour on the middle row. And we could just have a little bit here behind the cabin just so it has a sense of a hint of more shadow. Don't need to overly do that. Zoom out, and well, I think at this point we could create a bit of a reflection in the water. So we can go to the wrench symbol, the add, copy canvas, and paste. You won't see this, but there is now another version at the very top. You'll notice this when we go to the transform. Flip it vertically, and you can see clearly now it's flipped essentially the whole image, but as an individual separate layer. Deselect. I'm going to go to the selection, I'm going to go to the rectangle, and I'm going to drag from up here until the bottom of the rectangle matches here at that line. Then I can go to the layer, tap on it, and tap clear, and it erases that top selected area. Then I can go back to the transform, and I can move that entire area downwards so it lines up nicely with the top area, so we get a nice reflection there. Now if it struggled to match it up at that edge, then just go back onto it, put it on freeform, just stretch it a little bit. You've obviously not lined it up correctly, like I haven't, and if it needs a little bit more, then do that until you're satisfied that it's got rid of that edge. I don't mind a little bit of a division there. We're going to create a difference there anyway, and it really has a transformative kind of effect. I think it's really a beautiful kind of look, and we can immediately with that layer now go to the adjustments, motion blur, and we'll just slide it to the left just in that first instance to create a division between the upper part that's going to be in full focus clarity and then the bottom half that's going to look more distorted. And I'll do it to slide it to the left, maybe just in the first instance about 15%, and deselect, and it's just enough to see a difference. But I feel like this area of the canvas now looks really empty. We've got almost a kind of complete side over here, but we're missing something over at this area. So we're going to go to our top layer and create a new layer, layer 15. I'm going to go in with the airbrushing medium brush, back to my colours, back to the second colour on the bottom row. And from this side, I want it to be a little bit lower. You can see the line there that represents the top of the water line in the distance. I want it further down from that and also further down from that, but not too much, so maybe just about there. And I've got this at 1% size, maybe 50% strength. We'll do a line across, maybe 1% size, maybe larger on that 1% so you can see it better. Do that line across, and we can put that up 2%, and then from the edge just start to create some rocks, some structure here. And it starts to bank up. We can just go over that a few times just to create a bit of a mass. I don't want to go into too much detail over at this side. We're just getting a sense of things. So I'm going to go to the organic rainforest brush, the top end of 2% and 100% opacity, and I'm just going to build in some foliage now emerging from this side. So we've got some trees, different elements that are over at this side, but we don't really need to go into a huge amount of detail on them. Bit of a silhouette to begin with is a good start. Maybe even go to the black colour, the 6th colour. Just up near the top there, and that's a good start. So then we can go to maybe the 3rd colour on the bottom row, and same settings, just start to introduce a nice cooler green colour for these lower areas. Then just put it down to the 1%, and then maybe we could start to suggest more foliage down here, creeping down to the water's edge a little bit. It's still quite a vibrant green, but that's okay. And I think what I'd like to do is go back to the layer underneath it, create a new layer, and then it's layer 16, but it's underneath layer 15. And I'm going to go in with a much more vibrant green, so maybe the 7th colour on the middle row, up into the 2% size again, and then just some vibrant colours, kind of competing a little bit there in the background, just so you get some good variation over at this side, so it's not all just one thing really. I'm going to take the top 2 layers and just pinch them together, or take the top one, tap on it and merge down if that's tricky. Slide and duplicate that, then go to the transform, flip it vertically and move this down. So again, we want to create something of a reflection. Line it up best you can, deselect, then on that bottom selection, adjustments, motion blur, and again, just this time I'm going to slide it to the right. I'm doing it to a more significant amount, so maybe about 20%, and deselect. And I feel like it needs just a little bit of something near the bottom area. In fact, first of all, I'm going to merge those 2 layers together. Again, tap on the top version, merge down if it's easier. With that merged version, I'm going to go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur, and just going to blur that in, maybe just about 2%, softens it slightly. I want the sharp focus to be over at the side, and then I'm going to zoom in. I want to spend a little time just focused on this area. I'm going to go in with the medium brush with an airbrushing. I'm going to go for the 4th colour on the bottom row, 1% size, 50% strength. I'm just going to create highlights along the top edge of some stones that are in this section, just along that water's edge a little bit. Maybe go to the black colour, the 6th colour, strengthen those stones up a little bit with some nice dark tones along the bottom. Maybe I'll go to the 7th colour and just create a slightly lighter highlight on some of these stones, just to really make them a bit clearer so they're not totally lost in the kind of foliage areas there. I feel like I want to go back to the 2nd colour on the bottom row, again with the organic rainforest brush, and I think actually 2% size, 100% are past it. I just want to add some darker foliage in here again. Just blend it in a little bit. And now we're faced with bits of water we want to exaggerate slightly, so I'm going to go to the top layer, create a new layer. Again, it's called layer 16, but we can just tap on that and rename it. Maybe call it water. Click return. And on this layer, I just want to make certain things a little bit clearer. I've got the sun coming through here, so I want it to be impacting up there. I'm going to go to the 10th colour on the top row with the airbrushing soft brush. I'm going to put it down, low on the 2% size, maybe 10% strength. It's still going to be quite vivid. And I'm going to draw a line across, and I'm going to hold it until it snaps. Get that nice straight line, just zoom out, check it. Build it up, do it again. Do it again. I'd rather do it in increments where I'm building it up. Turn it down again, 1%. And then I feel like I can go in there and just be a little bit more sketchy with it now and just strengthen that up as I see fit, make it even brighter. And that's starting to suggest the kind of water effect. Maybe I could bring another line in here, hold it. Do this freehand if you feel confident enough to do kind of freehand stripes and gestures, but if you're not, then use the snap function. And then really I want a sense of division between the land and the water, so I'm going to turn that down even more, low on the 1%, stick at the 10%, and then I'm just going to go in there more manually, because it doesn't matter if it's a little bit rougher, it's the water kind of breaking at the edge plus other things that's just going to make this so it's more organic, more natural. And we're going to add some stones in a minute too, but I'll just do a line first. More sketchy is absolutely fine. Bring that all the way across. Perhaps we'll go to the 5th colour, slightly different white, but I think it might work better. So stay at the 1%. I'm going to put it up slightly to 20%-ish. And just have it a slightly less consistent, so it's a bit stronger and a bit brighter in places too. Don't necessarily need it to be completely uniform all the way along. And down this area, I'm going to go to the 10th colour. And then going to go just along this water's edge with the second colour on the bottom row, still with the soft brush, 1% size, maybe 60% strength. Create some stones, as well as the suggestion of a shadow as well, or reflection rather. You don't need to really spend a lot of time on that at all, just an acknowledgement that it probably would have a reflection. Create a series of these all the way along, just so it has something in addition to the greenery, some stones at the water's edge, makes it more interesting. Then I'm going to go to the 7th colour on the bottom row, turn it up a little bit, so maybe 80% strength. And well, we need the sun kind of impacting on those stones as well, so top edge. And it's a small feature, but I think it just breathes a bit more life into that region. Zoom out, you don't need to really get overly bogged down into the details of it. I always get us to the point of a general effect, and if you want to zoom in and spend longer on some of these details, then I do encourage that. Please feel free to do that as much as you want, but getting us to the basic point that it kind of gels and works as an image is my kind of intent with these tutorials. I'm going to stay with that colour, maybe have it 1% size and a bit lower, so maybe 40% strength. I'm just going to introduce some dashes in the water. Maybe I'll go for a lighter colour. 5th colour. Create little clusters of shapes, like that. Even lower on that 1%, maybe even higher on the percentage, so 70. Create some anomalies, things that just cut across and just remind us that there's a surface there that can have things floating on it. Maybe go to a light green, maybe the 7th colour on the middle row. Maybe we can go for a dark green. In fact, maybe go for the 3rd colour on the bottom row. Create a sense of kind of organic matter that's settled on the surface. And then we go back to the 7th colour again and have the dark and the light colour kind of interplaying. So maybe the light's just dappling some of this organic matter in some places, so that maybe the light is just touching some areas of this area on the water, and then other bits are going to be more in shadow. Could even go to a darker colour than that. We go to the 6th colour. Some other features in the water there. Back to the 5th colour. And then, well, we can go back to the reflection, which was on that inserted image above layer 13, and we're going to go in with the selection, freehand, and I'm going to grab the bottom half of that reflection, like that. I'm going to go to the feather, I'm going to put it up to maybe 40%, then I'm going to go back to the adjustments, the motion blur, and then again just slide it to the side, maybe a bit more, maybe quite a lot more, maybe another 20%. Deselect everything, and then it's just blurred it a bit more here compared to up there. And if I backtrack that, you can see the difference. It's really clear there. Blur it in more and you can see the difference. I think that works better that way. I can also go in with maybe the smudge, put it on the hard brush with an airbrushing, 2% size, top end of 2%, 100% opacity, and then I can just distort that water a little bit and the reflection obviously, and exaggerate some of the sense of the water pushing things around a little bit. It helps with that effect a little bit. Top layer again, back in with the medium brush this time, still with some of these vibrant colours. We'll go to the 5th colour on the bottom row. We've got it at 1% size, maybe 90% strength. I'm just going to carefully articulate some shapes over here, maybe. Something like that. And then just 1 or 2 over here as well. I think maybe the whole reflection could be a little bit darker, so let's go to the inserted image, adjustments, hue, saturation and brightness. I'm just going to turn it down a little bit too. So maybe to the 47%, and it just makes it a note darker than the upper area, and I think that works better. Finishing touch, top layer, create a new layer, layer 17, and I'm going to go to the soft brush within airbrushing, go to a nice light color. We'll go for the 10th color on the top row, 5% size, really low. It's important it's super low, put it about 3%. I'm just going to bring in some light coming from that top edge, that top corner, bring it down. So it just brings suggestions of shafts of light coming through down here, stopping at the water, can allow it to bunch together into a block of sun in places. And then turn it down to maybe 2%, then we can just bring a slight separation of 1 or 2 lines in there as well, but don't overdo this. I think that's plenty enough. Okay, I'm going to leave this tutorial here at this point. I hope you've enjoyed following along. If you have made it all the way to the very end, maybe leave me a little treat emoji in the comment section. That's always fun to see. Otherwise, don't forget to hit subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, that also helps, and I shall see you back here soon. Bye for now.